Hello fellow crafters, I'm Karen and this is the 5th video in the Peppermint Christmas series. In this video we'll be working on these ribbon trees in the peppermint theme along with the gifts that are in front of them. The basic idea behind this craft is that we're going to take styrofoam cones, and I have two here, a large one and a small one, and cover them in ribbon using pins to attach them to the cones. So the materials that you'll need are on the screen, but I do want to share a little bit about the particular ribbon I've chosen. So obviously with the peppermint theme we're going to need red and white. You could vary that and go to a green and white or even mix in green with the red and white, but for the traditional peppermint idea we're going to be using just plain red and white. So my primary ribbon is a bright Christmassy red, and this ribbon is 5/8 of an inch wide, and I wanted something that was wide enough that I wouldn't have to do tons and tons of tons and tons of ribbon side by side to cover the surface. So you want something that's wide enough to actually do the covering. And then on top of that I plan to layer white, and this was just white ribbon that I had in stock, so it's 3/8 of an inch wide, and nothing especially brilliant about that, just plain old white. And then I thought that I would like to layer a third layer on top of that. So I selected, this one's actually a darker shade of red, and it has a slight texture, and I only selected this one because they didn't have the one that had no specific texture, so this is kind of a ribbed ribbon. But this is an 1/8 inch wide, and I'll be able to use the 3 of these to make a stack of wide red, then white, then narrow red, to kind of add some variation to the design. So that's the basic idea that I'll be aiming for. And it won't be straight on like this because it'll be making loops, so it may get a little bit of variation, which I think will actually improve it overall. So once you have all of your materials, the first step is going to be to determine sort of how long your ribbon needs to be so that you can cut them and start pinning them on. I'm only going to be doing 2 trees for this, a large one and a small one, but if you were to do more than that, that would be totally up to you. I would just recommend that you start with the largest tree so that if by some unfortunate experience you run out of your ribbon, you can change it for the smaller tree rather than get stuck in the middle of the large tree. And the other important thing to note about this process is that you just need to start at the bottom of the tree and work your way up, because if you were to start at the top, you'd have a lot more of your ends of the ribbon and your pins showing. By starting at the bottom, we can layer over top of that just like you would put siding on a house, and it won't show the part that doesn't look pretty. So I need to determine here just how long I want this to be, and I want to not have them be super short, because if they're really short loops, then you have to do a lot more of them to get anywhere. And I'd rather this not take all day. So I'm thinking you do want to have your loops be sort of small or tight enough that they make a closed point here. If you were to leave it wide open with really big loops, you'll see your styrofoam through. So we don't want that. We want to kind of optimize where the ribbon can sort of close that loop, which is partly also the placement of it, but then also cover a lot of ground at once. So that's pretty close, I think. And once you get past the bottom row, underneath these holes will be the previous row, so it's not a big deal, but the bottom we want to be pretty tight. The other thing that I have to consider here is just whether I want to do all of the loops independently. So sort of put the largest one down, and then separately layer the next one on top of it, and then the third one. And you could always do this with just 2 ribbons or even just one. The idea is not original to me to put ribbon on a cone like this, but mine I plan to have 3. You could also, to communicate peppermints, just do a red row and then a white row and a red row and a white row. But I think that this is the way I want to head. And then the other option is kind of to do what I was just describing with alternating rows, where they're stacked, but sort of separately. And I don't know that I like that as much. So I think I'm going to go with all 3 of them, and I'm going to probably measure just so that I can mass produce these. So let me grab a ruler here. So it's looking like that's about the loop I'm going to aim for. So I'm going to cut my ribbons at 4 inches. And I'm just going to do a quick one here for a test, and if I like it, then I can do several more. There is really no need to be super perfectionistic about this. I'm just measuring because I think it'll make it easier in the long run, but you can be a little bit loose with it. You want them to be close to the same size, but they do not have to be scientifically perfect. So the idea now, which is trickier than I was expecting, is to get them sort of stacked on top. And I'm aiming for center because I think I can be fairly consistent doing it that way. You could offset them, so like align one edge. Not sure how that would look. Probably just different, but probably also good. So once I've got my 3 layers stacked, then I just loop them around, put one on top of the other. And you want to make sure, like I've got a little bit of tightness here. You want to make sure it doesn't do that. They want to be sort of comfortable looking. So not super tight, not too loose either. And then you'll take your pin, and you want to be careful that you catch all of the layers. And don't go too close to the edge, or you may miss, or rather catch the ribbon, but have it fray later, which could be an issue. So I've gone about 1/4 of an inch up my ribbon, made sure I caught both ends of the small ribbon, and I'm going to let these overhang just a little bit. So that's about a 1/2 inch overhang, and I really based it kind of on where that coverage is. Now if you put it down like this, it'll push out a little, and I might be okay with that. Or alternatively, I can always stick something on the bottom to sort of act as a trunk and lift it up later. I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to do that. So let me cut a few more of these, and then we'll start looking at how to go around the edge. I've made 5 more of these at approximately the same length. So we're going to go ahead and make the next one here. And I recommend that as you make these, you get them pinned before you try to stick them on the cone. It'll be easier, so you don't have to like get them perfectly placed, then try to get a pin in where you might then mess up what you've tried to perfectly place. This way, you can sort of fix it in your hands and then just push the whole thing in. And if you look at this, the tops are not aligned, so you're not looking for your ribbon to be perfectly straight lines all the way across, because that makes a funny shape. So you have to let them sort of relax to their natural position when you've got the center points at the end aligned through the pin. So it doesn't really matter if we go clockwise or counterclockwise here. I'm just going to start going to the right. And you want to get them close enough together that they're pretty much touching. And you don't want to go up and down too much here. So I'll show you one more, and then I'll show you what the next layer looks like, so that we can make sure we're on the right track before we go all the way around with the current spacing. That one I missed the smallest ribbon there, so always make sure you catch that or it will fall apart later and you'll be sad. So if I show you the next layer, I'm just going up here a little bit. So if I go about there, you can still see in and see the styrofoam a little. So this is going to be a tricky sort of activity to try to get it exactly where you want it. And it'll matter how you look at it, because if you look down at it, then you don't really see the styrofoam, but if you look straight at it, you do see it a little bit. You also have to ask whether you really care, because I chose the white cones so that if you did end up seeing a bit of it, you're not seeing green styrofoam or any other color, you're just seeing the white. So I think I'm on the right track here. I think a little bit tighter might be better overall. So if I put that one on hold, I'm just going to squeeze these up a little. Just so there's a little less dead space in there that I have to hide with future layers. So I'm going maybe 3/4 of an inch apart with the pins. Yep, 3/4. And I'm trying to stay about 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom with my particular sized ribbons. So let me complete the bottom row here, and then we'll start the next row so we can talk about the layering, and then it'll just be a matter of going all the way up the rest of the comb. Okay, so I've got a couple comments to make about that process. The first is just that you want to be as efficient as possible with your ribbon cutting process. You're going to have to cut a lot of them, so the more factory-like you can become, the better off you'll be. So what I had started doing that time around was stacking all 3 ribbons and then cutting all 3 at once. The first time I had just done them individually, but that took probably close to 3 times as long. So definitely faster that way. You're also going to want to try to end carefully. When you get close to the end, start eyeballing how you're going to need to space out the last few ribbons so that the spacing looks good. Mine, to be quite honest, was somewhat coincidental that it came out so closely, although I did adjust actually the first ribbon that I had put in and the second to last to make up the space between the last one and either side of it. This just looks really pretty from the back, which is why I keep looking at it like this. The last thing that I did on that time through was I used the pin to secure one set of the ends of a set of pieces. So I put the pin through all 3 layers on one side, then sort of stretched out to get the layers lined up, and then put the pin through the other ends. And that I found worked very smoothly for getting the pieces in the right orientation. So the next set will be, see, that one's a little loose, will just be the next layer, and we'll have to be kind of careful. We just want to make sure we're covering up any dead styrofoam space in here and the pin heads if possible, and then we'll just work up layer by layer from there. I've made one change to my process this time around, and that is that while I've got my my pieces held tightly, I'm putting the pin in before I even bother to cut the length of it, and that allows me to have a fixed point to straighten the rest to, and once I've cut it, they all stay together, so when I need to do the last part and put the pins through the other end, it's already connected at a point. And then when I start here again, I've already got a precise hold. I stick in my next pin, and I can keep doing the same process. So I think that's a little bit faster, a little bit smoother, and worth doing. And we'll go ahead now and start the second layer of ribbons around the cone. Okay, so that's the second layer done, and the only thing I would really say about that process was that when I was first putting the first one in, I was thinking that I ought to center it between two of the bottom ones, but it actually looks better when it's just slightly offset rather than centered, and the reason is that we benefit when you look through the hole and see the ribbon from below. Which means if we offset in between, that's where it's not got ribbon. So if it's over here, we're going to see more of the styrofoam. Now, because of the size of the ribbon, you've got certain ones where you're going to see more styrofoam through it. And I don't know that there's much we could do about it apart from having like wrapped the styrofoam with ribbon in the first place. But that comes with its own challenges, so I'm not really sure that that's a better course of action. So I just kind of did the same thing that I did with the first one. I lined them up approximately evenly spaced, and then adjusted the last few when I got close to the end just to make sure that it was all going to line up approximately right. And I believe on the bottom I had 15 of these, so let me check that. Yeah, that was 15, and then the row above is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13. So I went down by 2. So I might expect the next one to be approximately 11, but we shall see. I took a break and I was able to finish up the larger of the two trees and do the majority of the work on the smaller of the trees. So there are just a couple of things I wanted to reflect on, and then I'll finish off the smaller tree so that you can see how I did it on the larger one. The top of this tree was kind of a tricky thing to do. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do when I got to the top. And what I ended up deciding was I folded over a red ribbon and just tacked it along the top edge because you end up with this set of ribbon edges, which isn't as pretty. So I put that ribbon down, and then I basically made some bows of the white and thinner red ribbon and stacked them on top, and then put a large quantity of pearls, meaning, how many is this? 8 pearls on top. I don't love this as a tree topper, but I didn't really have any better ideas. So you could really do anything at the top. You could sort of do a bow or do anything that might be a tree topper. You could make a tiny little angel. Whatever works for you. This is what I'm going to leave it as and hope that it doesn't draw too much attention, basically. But this one is done otherwise, and I do like the way it kind of sits on the table and flares out the ribbons at the bottom. I had considered putting a trunk, basically something for it to sit up on, which you could do, and you could easily glue something in or maybe even use pins in some way to hold it, but I don't think it's necessary for these, so I'm going to be leaving it just like this. And so then I went ahead and did this second one, and for this one you can see that I added the green ribbon, and I like it. I like the way it turned out. It's a nice little variation, and it acts as sort of an accent without being distracting from the overall white and red. And you can get peppermint candies that have green instead of red or green in addition to the red. So I think it is a nice little variation on the larger one. I did find with this one that I didn't quite line up at the top, and rather than go back and try to somehow realign the layers of this, I decided I'm just going to cut that off. So just bear in mind that that's an option. There's no easy way to do this. You could probably take an X-Acto knife and just sort of slice through it. I'm going to try and see what happens with scissors, and if I regret that, I can always go back and do something different. So let me give this a shot, and I'll probably have to do a little bit of cleanup because this stuff makes a large mess. That actually went significantly better than I expected it to. Just trying to get any little crumbles off. It sort of, the scissors sort of pulled in the ribbon rather than cut it, so I only lost a little tiny bit of ribbon there, which is no big deal. And that levels it right out, so that is definitely a doable method if you need to shorten it. And the next step then is to just add the upper ribbon edge. So for this step in the process, you can sort of estimate how far it is around the outside. I'd give yourself some slack unless you're really short on ribbon, just so you have some room to make mistakes. And when we do this, you'll want to fold over the edges. So I folded this in half, and I have the folded side up on my first tree. And after folding in half, I'm just folding the whole thing over, and maybe by 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. It's essentially hemming the edge of the ribbon so that you don't have that frayed end of this ribbon, which is precisely the thing we're trying to hide in the main ribbon. And then you can just take your pin, make sure you catch both ends of it, and put that through. One thing to keep in mind is that you're running out of space up here at the top, so if you put these if you put these pins in straight on, you're not going to have a whole lot of room there. So I suggest you angle them down at least a little bit. And it doesn't matter where you start precisely on this, just start fairly close to the top edge and align it in some way or other with something pretty underneath. I may want this to go a little higher, but I can always come back and trim the ribbon if I need to. I think I'm going to probably do both, but I'm going to move this up a tad from where I tried first. Sometimes it is difficult to get through all the ribbon. I had this trouble on the first one when I was trying to put things down through the top. It was a little frustrating, but eventually I did get through all of them. And then I put pins on the first one about every 1/2 inch or so. You want it to be often enough that it holds your ribbon without it doing any weird moving around or puckering or anything, but not so many that it's really distracting. And for each of these, I'm just sort of going back down through, trying to keep an eye out for where there are other pins that I might run into so I can avoid those. And then you just go ahead and pin this all the way around the outside, and then you can make your topper. When you do get close to the end, you'll want to do the same thing that you did on the first side, which is to put a little hem at it, basically. So I'm going to put one more pin in here just to sort of be my last point. It's going to be a little bit closer together than the others, just because of where I ended up. And then you want to just go up to your edge and then go that extra hem length past it. Try to cut your ribbon fairly evenly. And then you can fold it back on itself, and it won't meet up perfectly with the other edge, but it should be pretty close. And you can play with it as much as you need to try and get the edges to line up the way you want. Okay. So now that you have the top sort of finished, you can go ahead and do the actual tree topper. Wow, my ribbons got really messy on this one. And the nice bit about this is that you can always move things around because it's just a single pinpoint. So for the first one, I did sort of a layer of white bow and then a layer of red bow on top. And I'm not great shakes at making bows here, but the basic idea is to make loops. And remember, the more loops you make, the harder it is to get the pin through, but the more full it's going to look, so trade-off there. And then you put the pin through, sort of your center point. And then I'd take a minute to kind of spread out the ribbon pieces a bit. It's harder to do this once you've put it on, so it's better to do it now. I'm just going for a full look, nothing complicated, but it almost makes a ball sort of shape. And then it can be pulled down tighter onto the pin. Now with the first one, I had done one pin for the white and then a different pin for the green and then a different pin for the pearls on top. And I think I had some competing pins, basically. You run out of space to put them in there. So I might suggest that in the end, you sort of prep them on one pin, or separate pins rather, and then when you go to actually put them in, try to force them into one pin. So that's what that looks like. And then I did it with my smallest ribbon in addition, which on the other one was red, but this one is green, and it's exactly the same process. Then you just want to put it in the center. And you can sort of final adjust your ribbon pieces. And you could leave it right at that stage. What I had done with the other one is to add some pearls at the top, which I think I am going to go ahead and do here. And I tried to use a pin, a normal pin, through the head of the first bead that I used, pearl bead. But what ended up happening was the pin head went through. It didn't at first, so I thought it was good enough, but it turned out not to be. So I opted to, to just use a quilting pin that has a white head on it, because it looks like a pearl, and it will definitely be large enough to hold the other one in place. So I recommend that. It's easier. Save yourself some pain and effort. And then this just has to go right down in, and I went right next to the existing pin head. And I'm not going to do too much on this one. It's a smaller tree, and I don't want to do so much that it becomes distracting. That's always the trick, is to do just enough, but not too much. And that's how the trees come together. The last step is optional, and that's to make presents to go at the bottom of the tree. So for this step, I've already done 6 of them, just so that I could save some time here in recording, but I wanted to show you how I made them. So I took just regular old cardboard and cut it down into pieces of various sizes that could stack. So I used between 3 and 8 layers of cardboard to make different size stacks. There are different heights, there are different ratios, so different sized rectangles and squares, and I was just trying to provide a lot of variation. Some are long and skinny, some are short and squat, and I hot glued the layers of cardboard together to make basically a cube or a rectangular prism, and then I wrapped them in wrapping paper. So you could use obviously whatever wrapping paper you wanted. I had trouble finding solid red, so I opted to go with the white and the brown, and I'm just wrapping these like any other present. I will note that I tried to make sure that there was a brown side of the cardboard on both sides. Depending on how see-through your wrapping paper is, if you were to use a box that's got something bright or printed, like printed text on it, it may show through your wrapping paper. So I just was trying to avoid that. And all I'm going to do is just wrap this present here, and then we'll add some decorations to our tiny presents so that they fit in with the theme a little bit better. So that makes our 7th little present, and odd numbers. I went with 7 instead of 6, and I opted for 4 white over 4 brown just because I think the white looks prettier. Now at this point you could use anything you wanted to decorate the presents. So I'm going to probably use some ribbon, and I have these fake berries. You could use fake flowers or pearls, really anything that you want to make them look a little bit dressier. So I'm going to have to experiment here a little bit on the ribbon, and I would recommend you stick with ribbon that you used during the crafting process, or things that are not too far of a stretch as far as keeping a unified design. So I wouldn't bring in, your lime green ribbon at this point if you didn't use lime green in the trees. So at this point it's just pretty experimental, and it's whatever you like and whatever you think looks good at the end. Okay, so I finished all my presents, and there wasn't much to talk about in the process. I would just recommend that you try to use the things that you have and try to get out of the standard box, but keep some things in the standard box. And what I mean by that is, like, this little gift is your standard ribbon around each of the sides. The normal way, it's just tied in a knot at the top. And I stuck a couple of pearls there. The same thing I did in green over here with some of the little berries. But if you did them all like that, it would get a little bit boring. So some of the ways that you can vary it are offset the center. So this one I did with the bow on the side and did a few pearls down, which makes it look like a shirt and a bow tie, but that wasn't really my intention originally. Or this one I just did two sets of ribbons on one direction, the long way, and then threw some flowers on there. This one is also 2 ribbons, but approaching diagonally, and I used the whole tip of the berry bush on that one. This one I was able to make a little bow on top, but I put some berries in so that it wouldn't look too plain. But I did not go perpendicular with the ribbon on this one. And then this one was just wider ribbon instead of using the narrow ribbon. So I can mix these in with my little trees, and that is this craft in completion. Thanks for supporting Tickled Fancy Crafting by watching this video. Click the like button to let me know that you enjoyed the content, and subscribe to see new Tickled Fancy Crafting videos in your feed. If you'd like to be informed directly about the content, ring the notifications bell. Comment with crafts that you would like to see in the future, and remember, you can make this.